Welcome to Justice and Judgment. I have once again Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis and Bob. Iran and Israel have kind of got something started, have they not?
Yeah, they have a real quagmire started up in the Middle East. Of course, as you know, Chris, this started back in 1979. Was a young captain in Europe at the time, and we knew things were going to go pretty bad and very quickly, which they did after they took our 52 hostages. And it
Right.
wasn't until Reagan took over that they released the hostages. But life for the Israelis and for the Americans in the region, because of the Ayatollah and his henchmen, hasn't been all that good since that time.
Well, and I remember that incident because we were I had a roommate that was a soccer player at Texas Tech, and he was the number two soccer player. The guy named Chacha was a number one soccer player on that team, but he was from Iran. And we were all eating about 2 o'clock in the morning at a Denny's, and things were pretty heated. And a couple of drunk rednecks made a couple of comments, and that whole table of Iranians I was sitting at grabbed their butter knives and went over to that table and shut those boys down real quick. But I also remember in about 1975, the Crown Prince of Iran was at Reese Air Force Base. And
Yeah.
so I was living in Lubbock at that time, and that was the place to drive by and see his gated house with his guards. So that brings back a lot of memories.
Yeah,
Um,
it does.
and you bring up Ronald Reagan. As soon as he took office, Iranians immediately released our hostages, and now we have somebody that is very much like Reagan, very unpredictable, and but they don't seem to be budging as of yet.
Well, not yet. Uh, I think that President Trump has a couple cards up his sleeve. Obviously, he has a number of options. He can join the fight, and we're beginning to build up throughout the region. We have 31 air refueling tankers that have been sent over to Europe and the Middle East region. We have another carrier strike group that is joining. It's the Gerald Ford strike group,
Yeah,
the
I see.
Nimitz, and and so that plus the Fifth Fleet, which is already in Bahrain and the Gulf. Of course, we sent a bunch of F-16s, some F-22s, and we're holding in abeyance perhaps the B-2. We could put it on Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, or we just may keep it at Whiteman. So we'll have to wait and see. There are a host of things, but clearly deterrence is the president's first issue. He's in really using that option. I think in a very diplomatic way, hoping that maybe the Europeans that are meeting with the foreign ministers are doing what they need to do with Iran. We'll have to wait and see there. There are other options that the president has. I understand, based on what the press secretary told us yesterday from the White House, that the president indicates that Iran has all the ingredients for a weapon. What he didn't know is whether or not they'd give them the go-ahead to build the weapon. Unlike what the Israelis seem to imply is that they have. So, there's a bit of ambiguity there, but that's what we're dealing with today.
Well, I remember, and I want to say it was back in 2013, 14. It was when Obama was in office, and Netanyahu had given a presentation, and at that point in time, he made it sound like, hey, they're going to have a weapon within a year or two. And so I know that's caused some concern for some of our politicians. Well, he said this before, and I trust President Trump. I believe the man. I know for a fact he does not want to go to war. That's just not his nature, and he'll go to, I think, extremes not to go to war. But then, who is feeding him the information? Because you and I both know that there are war hogs out there that that's their life and their business. And yeah, let's get into another war. Somebody's going to make money. So
Yeah,
how does he navigate through that?
that is tough, Chris. As you know, in 2018, the Mossad went to a warehouse in Tehran and confiscated, thousands of documents. And then Netanyahu, who at that time, also today, was the prime minister, and he publicized it on television. He said, look, they had all the ingredients for a nuclear weapon. They had the plans. What he said in 2018, 2019 was that we weren't quite sure if the Ayatollah had given the go-ahead to start to make a weapon. Now, advance forward or back for a second. Let me put this in historic perspective. In 2002, as we were getting ready to launch into Iraq, Operation Iraqi Freedom,
Right.
that
Exactly.
the Israelis convinced us that their Saddam Hussein had Scuds in the western part of that country that could easily
Right.
range to Israel and would be willing to do that. Now, that ended up not being true. Now, I will tell you, I've spent decades and decades in the Pentagon, and the intelligence community, U.S. intelligence community, is very, very suspicious of our good friends, the Israelis. They tell us things sometimes that just aren't true for their own political reasons.
Right.
Now, advance forward. I've seen Netanyahu's statements, his defense minister, that of his commanders. I've met some of these people over the years. And what they are suggesting is that the Ayatollah gave the go-ahead to fabricate weapons. That's my understanding. And although our press secretary didn't say that from the podium yesterday when she was speaking, but that seems to be the conclusion. That's the only thing I can reach, because 60 days prior to this launch into Iran, Netanyahu met with President Trump at the White House.
Right.
And at that time, I surmise that President Trump says, look, give me 60 days, and then Katie, bar the door.
Right.
Well, on the 61st day after that meeting,
Yeah.
Israel launched into Iran, because it didn't seem as if, when we were looking back a week, that Israel or that Iran was going to really address the President Trump's primary concern, and that is to abandon its nuclear program. So that's kind of where we are. We love the Israelis, but at the same time, our intelligence people don't trust them. After
Right.
all, what was it? Gabbard, Tulsi, said on the 25th, I think, 26th of March of this year, that Iran, it's our assessment that Iran's leadership had not given the go-ahead to build a weapon. And then something happened. So it would appear as if the president is convinced that Netanyahu is correct, and that perhaps, if we don't have new intelligence, that Tulsi wasn't. So you've got this ambiguity that's floating out there. And therefore, I think President Trump, issued this 2-week warning to Iran. Says, look, I'm going to give you a 2-week warning. Now, it doesn't mean I won't do it tomorrow or in 2 minutes, but I'm going to at least, kind of hold back on my options for a while, hoping that diplomacy can rule. And so we'll have to wait and see.
Well, and when I heard that he said he was going to give them 2 weeks, I immediately thought, okay, he's maybe trying to give them or put them off, make them think they've got 2 weeks, and I thoroughly believe that he could do something in the next 24 hours. That may be just a false sense of security for them to think, well, we've got 2 weeks. I've got to believe, and I understand the distrust between our intelligence and the Israelis, but I've got to think that, especially what's going on in Gaza, he wouldn't just go and launch something that big against Iran unless he seriously really believed that something was up. Because from what I understand, is it 60% to get 60% greater up to get it to nuclear level?
Well, it's 90% enriched uranium, but it doesn't take but a week or two to take 60%, which we believe their collection of 20,000 pounds of 60% enriched uranium resides in Fort Owl, the facility that's 300 feet under the ground, and the one that's under consideration for bombing using our GBU 57. So that's where we are. I have no reason to doubt that they are moving forward. But if that facility is not destroyed and they do proceed and develop weapons, because it only takes 92 pounds to make a small nuke, and they have over 20,000 enriched 60% right now, and the most modern centrifuges are those that are inside Fort Dow. So you have to understand that this is a guessing game to a certain degree.
Sure.
I just don't want to see us in another war in the Middle East unless it's really necessary. And if they are moving forward and our intelligence agrees with the Israeli assessment that we're going to face a nuclear Middle East, then Saudi Arabia, the Turks, the Egyptians, and others may well develop their own weapon systems, and then it's going to be a nightmare.
Well, one speculation I heard, and you can weigh in on this, is that at 60% they could at the very least make a dirty bomb. Is that possible?
Well, yeah, you don't need 60%, but yeah, if you want an explosion, other than one that is just tossing out, radioactive materials, then you have to have 90% or more, or plutonium. And, they probably have a bit of plutonium, but not enough, like the North Koreans, to make an atomic weapon. And so those are all ingredients. The president has good people that are advising him. I hope that, we're getting the total truth. If in fact the intelligence community has come to a different conclusion than what Tulsi gave us months ago, then I'd like to hear that. And I think we deserve to hear that, especially if the president's going to launch us into another war. I don't want to see unnecessary bloodshed on either side.
I've been listening to the debates on some of the talk shows, and now with the advent of all the podcasts and people not going through the legacy media, you're hearing, I believe, sometimes a little bit more truth than you are fake news, I guess. And you've got two school of thoughts that I've been listening to, and one is, yeah, let's go take them out, because if we don't take them out, they're gonna, they consider us the big Satan, and Israel little Satan. They may strike us just to pull us in. And then you've got those saying that, hey, we don't need another war. We had this drawn out Iraqi war. We had this drawn out Afghanistan. Let's get out of this business. We just have no business in there. But then I look at the side of, we are Israel's friend. We as evangelical Christians believe that is God's chosen people, God's chosen land. And do we have a responsibility to protect them from possibly being destroyed? Because it wouldn't take much.
No, I agree with you. I totally agree with what you said. The issues that I have, Chris, is back in 2002, I was part of, the media analyst community that the Bush administration manipulated and lied to us about.
I remember you telling me
what the threat was. And, we were eviscerated after, no weapons of mass destruction were found. Well, I tried behind the scenes before that happened, before we launched in March 2003 into Iraq. I brought contrary evidence that came from Iraqi generals that were friends of my friends in exile. And I gave it to them. I know I gave it to them. They didn't do anything with it. And I was lied to my face by Secretary Rumsfeld, as far as I'm concerned, General Meyer, the chairman. I was sitting at a conference room table, military analysts like me that were on TV all the time, and then The secretary, the deputy, the chairman, the vice chairman, and the primary staff were all there. And I asked questions about, the reliability of the weapons of mass destruction, and they told me flat out, it was true. We heard it from Vice President Cheney as well earlier. So this stuff, I just am very hesitant about believing that the world's falling apart,
Right.
and that I know Israel lies to us. And I've worked with the Israeli military for some time, and not long ago I was with the chief of staff of their armed forces. So, I have some insight here. I talked to a senior television producer yesterday, and she knows me from those days, 20 years ago. And she agrees, we cannot afford to lose another 44,000 Americans, to a needless war and $1 trillion. And so that's why I'm being somewhat hesitant in saying, yeah, gun ho, let's go in there and shoot them up. I'm not opposed to killing a bunch of, bad Iranians.
Right.
What I don't want to see is get involved in a ground war, because much of their ground and sea capabilities haven't even been touched as yet. Their air force is decimated, but only a third of their missiles are gone. And, my unknown at this point is, what are China and Russia going to do? Because they have strategic relationships with Tehran. So there's a lot to this.
That was my biggest concern. Wasn't that we couldn't just go over there and drop one of them bunker busting bombs on them, pretty much just annihilate them like we did in Iraq back in 91, and pretty much shut it down. But for the first time in history, from what I understand, Iran and Russia are kind of partnered up or friends. The last I heard, China was supporting Iran in this, and we've got Taiwan over here. That's another issue that could blow up, and we have no way of fighting. I don't believe two wars at one time, especially with China and Russia.
Yeah, I point that out in detail as to why our armed forces are not ready for multi-theater war. I really do, and preparing for World War III. Now, those are important. Also, keep in mind, North Koreans are in the pocket of Vladimir Putin. The North Koreans were the ones that built the underground facility at Fort Al. At least they did the digging. They've done a lot of the digging for the Iranians. The Chinese, of course, need 3 million barrels a day from Iran to sustain their economy. And they're not about to back out of that. They need that oil to keep fueling their factories. So there are a lot of issues here, to say the least. China is our pacing threat, if you believe our national strategy. They say it boldly. China is our problem. And so I don't want us to get tied down in the Middle East when, in fact, the rising threat, and we see it every day on many, many fronts, is the Chinese communists.
You make a very strong and valid point, because I've got to believe President Trump knows that, sees that same danger, and is got to be working behind the scenes trying to negotiate this. I don't see him backing down from his threats. He just has always been a man who has seemed to keep his word, keep his credibility, the credibility of this country. You are more familiar with Pete Hegseth. You know his, I guess, personally in his younger days. Where do you think he stands on this, or is he just kind of following President Trump's lead?
Interesting question. I'm not really sure. Pete is a smart guy. He used to be my intern when I was the vice president for Family Research Council. And Tulsi Gabbard, I'm a friend of a friend, and a number of them. If you believe Axios and some of these
No.
left-wing organizations that are talking about who is really advising the president,
Right.
they're suggesting that Hegseth and Tulsi are not involved in that. Now, I can't believe that. What they're saying is that General Kane, chairman, Vice President Vance, Wickoff, and then Radcliffe, the CIA. Now, if that's the team, fine. That's, the president's got to trust who he wants to trust.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
And so you have to have a team of advisors that have depth. Now, my concern, because I know people that are true experts. None of the people I named are true experts in the Middle East. Let that sink in.
Okay.
They don't understand, some of the dynamics. Now, they do the broader strategic picture, but they don't understand the nature of the Iranian mullahs, the ayatollahs, the whole ideological aspect of Shia Islam.
Yes,
And
I'm going to talk
the
about that
Mahdi,
later.
the Mahdi, their coming savior, and so
Yes.
forth, and how they deal with infidels like us. And so, there are issues there that they ought to hear. Now, I don't know if they'll hear it from the chairman. Um, I know in the Pentagon, we have a lot of experts that I worked with daily. And I know some that are retired. In fact, I told Fox News, I gave several names of people in the contact last night that are really experts and can talk to them about these countries and what they're doing and what they might not do and whether or not they'd surrender like Trump wants, which the answer is not easily.
Right.
So they're and the Israelis understand this. They live in the region. They have to be experts at who their enemies are, and so you have to kind of look at all of this. And there are some very, very challenging issues to deal with.
For those listening out there in the audience that don't understand the Mahdi and the religious extremists on that part, don't they believe that, much like we believe Jesus Christ is going to return, they believe that the Mahdi is going to return, but he returns in the midst of chaos. And if I understand right, if they create that chaos, it doesn't matter if it's created or if they create it, they can force his coming. And that is a religious extreme that you can't reason with. You
No, you
have no
can't.
defense for it, really, except to possibly strike first.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of the problem. If you grow up on that sort of diet of radicalism, and this is all you believe, and all those around you reinforce it, then it's something that is hard to overcome. And keep in mind, the IRGC, the Baji, which are the security forces that dominate the people of Iran, they keep the people terrified. Yes, some of the senior people of IRGC were killed. The advisor to Khomeini was killed. Um, but it's not going to be a cakewalk if, in fact, you want to insist upon them surrendering. They're just not going to do it easily because, as I wrote in an op-ed that was published yesterday, I think, by Fox News, that you need to go back to Cyrus the Great.
Mm,
The Persian king who opened the door for the Jews to immigrate back from Babylon, where they were
right.
held in captivity, to Jerusalem and restored. Well, that was the high point of the Persian Israeli relationship that dates back 2,500 years. It hasn't been all that good since that time. And that's part of the problem here, that you need to appreciate that this is an ancient rivalry that
Yeah.
is part of their education system. And on both sides, they have good reason to not trust one another, and to think otherwise is rather naive.
So from your chair, having the military experience and the analysis that you've got dealing with that type of religious extremists, what is the best, in your opinion, okay? What is the best approach to this problem? And do you believe Mr. Trump is approaching it in the best possible way, or do you have any thoughts? And if you were able to advise him?
Well, as of yesterday, after I heard the 2 week delay, yes, that had gave me comfort that he's going to use coercive diplomacy and that he's going to expand deterrence as he's already announced with 3 aircraft carrier groups and a bunch of KC-135s, B-2s, and hanging out there at Whiteman or down in Diego Garcia. So
Right.
yeah, all of that paints a picture that the president's trying to be patient. However, what I'm hoping will happen is that this coercive diplomacy is going to cause them to step back and to open their floodgates. Now, and allow us to go in there and inspect and to verify and destroy as necessary. Now, unfortunately, I've never trusted the Iranians with good reason, and neither should the Israelis. So, this will be a tenuous path forward. If, in fact, these diplomatic efforts fail, then it's likely that Mr. Trump's going to move forward and use the B-2 to destroy Fort Al. Now, I don't want to see us with a ground force in there. I don't want to see us with naval forces shooting it up with the 70 naval vessels that the Iranians have, because I don't think it serves either side. I don't necessarily want to see the destruction of their oil infrastructure, though that may be necessary at some point. But I do believe that we're on a path right now, tenuous as it is, trying to find out what we can get the Ayatollah to do, and if to at least back down and destroy his capability for a number of years. Of course, that's just kicking the can, and it's not solving the problem. Now, the Israelis, some of them at least, have called for the demise of Khomeini and regime change. I know that there are good people outside. The former Shah of Iran, his son, the Crown Prince, would love to go back. And there are, people inside Iran that would like to get rid of the scourge of the Islamic radicals that they have to deal with. So we'll have to wait and see.
Well, I see that, and I've heard a lot of that talk where if they can get the Iranian people to overthrow the government and let them take care of their own problem. I've got one last question for you, and it really kind of caught my attention. I didn't know what to think about it when President Trump said, "Look, we know where you're at, and we could kill you, but we're not going to right now." I've never heard a president talk like that before. What do you think his strategy is in that?
I remember when Soleimani was killed. We tracked him in Damascus, got out of the consulate there, went to the airport, got on an airplane, tracked the airplane. Airplane landed. He got into a 3-car caravan on his way to Baghdad, and we put a Hellfire missile in the back seat with him and killed him. In fact, I saw the pictures. I don't know
Wow.
if they were ever released.
Wow.
We know, I don't know with certitude because I'm not privy to some of the intelligence, but I'm sure that we're tracking, as we do around the world, we try to track all the leaders.
Right.
And especially in a volatile time like this, that would make sense to try to anticipate where he is. That's how we killed, or the Israelis killed, so many of their top IRGC people. They
Right.
knew where they lived. They
Yeah.
tracked. Now that suggests it's not just aerial and electronic intelligence. The Israelis probably have people on the ground that are recruited spies and have provided confirming information. So all of that is necessary, but I'm not surprised that the president necessarily says that we're aware of where he is. It's probably only in a few places. And yes, if we desired, but there are some sticky constitutional issues here when we talk about assassination. So I'm not going to support
Sure.
directly the assassination, but the Israelis don't evidently have a problem with that because they've been doing it left and right for years.
Well, and I said that was the last question, but do you feel that Iran is secretly or quietly wanting to goad us to get involved in this? Do they have some ulterior motive? Would they possibly pull another 9/11 or somebody else, God forbid, somebody else do something and it get blamed on the Iranians? Is that a possibility?
I think the latter is a possibility. I think they're probably up to their necks with issues right now with Israelis dominating their airspace and
Right.
having destroyed a significant segment of their missile launchers and some of their arsenals. And so, you know, if you're the Ayatollah, you're saying, okay, what can I salvage here?
Right.
What do I have to give up further to get these people to stop bombing and allow my regime to continue? Because that's basically what they want to do is to survive, and
Sure.
they're looking for an out. And so we may see something of this coercive diplomacy work. Time will tell.
Well, we'll just have to keep praying, pray for our leaders, pray for their leaders, and
Yeah.
hope that God's grace prevails in this. Bob, I want to thank you. I want to remind people that your book that came out last December, Preparing for World War III, now would be a good time to read that if you have not, because I think it'll give you a lot of insight and understanding of where we're at today.
Well, thanks, Chris.
All right. Well, you have a wonderful day. Enjoy the rest of your vacation. Thank you for your time, sir.
Okay, take care.
All right. Thank you.